To the Hooters Hot Wing Hotline we go. Shout out to our friends at Hooters. Check out all the good stuff they're doing. OriginalHooters.com. As we bring in our AllCity draft expert, there he is. He's officially a Super Bowl champion draft expert, doing the great work for the PHLY Eagles podcast. Fran, have you come down from your experience of the Eagles winning the Super Bowl and looking like, I don't know, the greatest team in the history of the NFL football?
Yeah, I mean, that was the discussion we had on the postgame show on Sunday night. Is this the best Eagles team of all time? Is this the best Philadelphia sports team of all time? And just what they did against Patrick Mahomes and Andy Reid speaks for itself. It was a dominant performance on both sides of the line of scrimmage, and it speaks to their philosophy when it comes to team building and the NFL draft.
Do you want to play the Bears opening week?
Yeah, I mean, look, I'm interested to see who they end up putting up, in that spot. The Eagles actually did not play opening night after their Super Bowl win in 2017. So we'll see what the league does here in the summer.
Yes, Greg.
Yeah. No, yeah, it'll certainly be interesting. I think Bears fans are trying to avoid the haymaker. We're not trying to be your homecoming game. Thank you very much.
Fran, just chill out. You don't need to see the Bears.
You also don't want that smoke, Fran. We're not afraid of you guys just because you won some little piddly Super Bowl. But congrats to you. Watched your post-game show. Certainly happy for you guys and jealous as well. I can only imagine what it's like to live in that world and have a Super Bowl post-game show that you guys just got wrapped up with, and everything you guys are doing this week with Super Bowl coverage did a fantastic job. So that being said, because obviously we know you're doing a great job, building up this draft database, getting all the teams here, for AllCity across our 5 cities and the entire NFL landscape of like what fans should expect to get ready for the draft. But before we get to that, let's talk about the players that played in the Super Bowl, and specifically on the Eagles side of things. The Bears obviously looking hard into the trenches, and you've got a couple defensive linemen there that could potentially be available. Not sure what your feelings are on the potential to re-sign either of those D linemen, or obviously, Mekhi Becton as well, who, on the offensive side of things, the Bears certainly need some help. So just trying to get to start out, do you think any of these three or all of these three will be available for the Bears to pick from?
It's a good question. I think another one too. I mean, Zach Bond is a free agent. He played for Dennis Allen, in New Orleans, and so is that a connection that could work out? We see that so often in free agency where coach comes in and we're going to bring in some of my former guys. My guess, and we've had this conversation, honestly, going back, into the middle stages of the season, was like, all right, if you had to kind of power rank these guys in terms of who's most likely to leave, who's least likely, my guess is Josh Sweat probably just put an exclamation point on his Eagles career with 2.5 sacks in the Super Bowl. They redid his contract going into the year. He wasn't happy with how last year ended, and so they just basically made it a 1-year deal. And so my guess is that he would not be back here in Philadelphia. I think when you look at Milton Williams, he may have priced himself out. He's set for a huge payday. I mean, he's only going to be 26 years old for next season. So this is a guy that's going to be hitting in his prime, disruptive against the run and the pass, just an outstanding interior presence who is poised to take a huge step in terms of like playing time and how he could be viewed in a defensive line rotation. And so I would say both those guys, honestly, guys, are probably going to be available. Now, Mekhi Becton, I would say probably less so. I wonder if he'll, not necessarily a hometown discount, but understand, hey, like I want to keep playing for the offensive line coach, Jeff Stoutland. I don't think the Eagles can let Zach Bond out the door. Now, his representation might say like, all right, we want to play the market and see, what we can get, based off of last year's linebacker market. And so that will be interesting to see how that plays out in the coming weeks. But I think at the end of the day, both of those linemen are probably going to hit in Milton Williams and Josh Sweat.
Would you give Mekhi Becton $40 million over 4 years, roughly?
Yeah, I struggle with it. My guess is probably not. I think that when you look at, his body of work this year, there were certainly flashes of greatness, right? I mean, when you look at, his ability to move people off the ball in the run game, I do think, and honestly, I hadn't even thought about it But him and going with Ben Johnson and the way that he has wanted those offensive lines to look in the past, with what they did in Detroit, I mean, that's a smash mouth unit. And so he certainly does fit that, Mekhi Becton. But I think when you look at, on the outside, he was a little bit of a liability in pass protection. When he plays inside, he's just a little bit too high. The pad level was a constant issue, especially in the run game. So, I would not necessarily say, like, all right, I'm going to throw the bag at him, and make him one of the highest paid guards in football, which if he were to hit the open market, my guess is, Carm, is that he would probably, get into that realm. That's what's interesting about it is that I think when you look at Milton, when you look at Sweat, when you look at Bond, like all these guys are going to be in that same, $18 million a year, APY contract value wise. So all of them are going to be right in that same market. My guess is that, Becton will fetch that. I would want to keep that on the shorter end duration wise. So you're not necessarily connected to it long-term if possible.
All right, Fran, go ahead, Greg.
Just speaking of, guards that are potentially worth the money, you see Trey Smith on the other side of the ball. He had to go up against Jalen Carter quite a bit in the Super Bowl. I'm wondering, from your perspective, obviously the Eagles D-line mollywopped, the Chiefs offensive line, but how do you think Trey Smith did in that game specifically? And do you think he is worth the potential of 20 to 25 million a year to sign him as a guard?
Short answer, yes, I do think he's worth it. I think when you look at the overall body of work with Trey Smith, I mean, he is one of the best guards in football. He is tailor-made for that system. And with Ben Johnson, I think when you look at what he can do on an island in pass pro, but then also in the run game, I think that would be a no-brainer signing. My guess is that Chicago will have competition for his services, right? When you look at like New England, how much money they can throw around. Mike Vrabel would love to have that kind of physical presence to kind of get things started there with his culture up in New England. They've got a ton of money, like I said, to throw around. And so Chicago would have competitors there, but Trey Smith would make a ton of sense for Ben Johnson. I think he would be worth every penny.
All right, Fran, let's go into the guide here. And I guess let's start. It's interesting how you're grouping the offensive linemen. You're doing a sort of the interior exterior split here.
Yeah.
Who is I'm not necessarily moving up your board, but who are you starting to get a little bit excited about that might be the second round 39-41 that spot for the Bears, or even down to 72?
It's a good question. I'm just looking at the board now. I think that, Donovan Jackson is a guy that I think would make a ton of sense, from Ohio State, but it was a 3-year starter at guard and then, was playing there at his 4th year this year. And then because of injury to Josh Simmons, the left tackle, they tried a couple other Band-Aids there and it just was not working. That offensive line was really in a rough spot. So they said, all right, let's kick Jackson out to tackle. And he did really well. I mean, you go into the playoffs and some of the defensive lines Ohio State went up against, he did an outstanding job. And so I think, look, at the end of the day, he's still a guard. I don't think that you're looking at him as a pure tackle, but I think there's something to be said for a guy that can kick out there in a pinch. Versatility is extremely important along the offensive line. And something I put in my article that just went up, today on the site. I think when you look at what Donovan Jackson can bring to the table, he's got that bully mentality, that ability to win in the trenches at the point of attack in the run game, and can be left on an island. I mean, for a guy to kick out to tackle and perform that way, you feel really good about his ability to hold up and pass protection on the inside in the NFL. So Donovan Jackson, for me, as guys continuing to watch him, he was coming off a little bit of a down year last year in 2023. And so watching him over the summer, I'm like, all right, probably, a little bit overrated because people were talking about him as a first round pick. I don't know if I'm quite there, but as I watched more of him this year, continue to watch him up close, he's a guy that I'm like, yeah, you know what? He might sneak into the first round, but if not, like top of round 2, right in that range for the Bears, at the top of the round would make a lot of sense.
Put you in the impossible position here, Fran. You're Ryan Poles. You just put your rookie quarterback, that's the franchise, in a less than ideal spot this year. Now, granted, a lot of the, Caleb had his hand in a good share of the sacks as well.
Sure.
All right. How would you, looking at if you were going to break down, you need 2 guards. Are you comfortable that one of them is going to be a rookie and I'm going to go sign a free agent? Would you even be comfortable enough to be, I'll take 2 guards. Like, if you're him in this spot, you got to get it right as soon as possible. Is there enough where there's no way that guy's floor is he can't play right now for me?
Me personally, I would say yes to all the above. Like, give me all the offensive linemen, right? Take as many swings as possible. It's almost to the point now with Chicago because, and it's the same way. This is not just unique to the Bears, but for a lot of these teams around the NFL, like enough is enough. You look at Philadelphia, and one of the things that's been such a hallmark of the way that they've built their team, and you look at Kansas City as well. Kansas City, they lose that Super Bowl a few years ago to Tom Brady and the Bucs. They remake that entire offensive line in one offseason, and then they come back and they win 4 Super Bowls in 6 years, right? Or, whatever the number is. So I think when you look at it, to me, like throw as many resources as you can at the trenches, really beef up the line of scrimmage. And if that offensive line, like mediocre, that shouldn't be like the goal. To be solid, like shouldn't be the goal. You want to be one of the best offensive lines in football. I think that's the best way to raise the floor and raise the ceiling of what you're trying to do. And if you pair that with a great scheme, with what Ben Johnson's bringing to the table, not just from a game plan standpoint, but then also as a play caller, if you want to lean into that, I mean, what did they do in Detroit? Like they had one of the best offensive lines in football, and it just gives you so much flexibility. And even in Philadelphia, one of the best offensive lines in football. Schematically, was it always like the most cutting edge thing watching this team every single week this year? Absolutely not. It was very basic. Sometimes they drop back and be like, there's 2 hitches over there. There's 2 hitches over there. Like, pick your matchup. That's not like cutting edge philosophical stuff. But when you got that offensive line, that can really kind of, again, raise that floor. And so to me, yeah, go get Trey Smith. And let's go draft Donovan Jackson at 40, and then we get into day 3, and there's a high upside guard or tackle. Like, bring them all in to me. If I'm the Bears.
Yeah, it's interesting because you look at the impact that Jalen Carter had on the Philadelphia Eagles, and you watch the Super Bowl, and obviously the Bears need offensive line help, but defensive line was probably the star of the show at the Super Bowl. And so the Bears also still need defensive line help and blue chip talent like Jalen Carter that the Bears chose to let walk and let you guys, bring him into your guys in Philadelphia's house. And I'm looking at Mason Graham, and every time I watch his tape, and I've watched him throughout his playing career at Michigan, I am tempted to trade up if I have to and use one of those 2nd round picks or maybe an additional 3rd round pick if Ian Cunningham goes to the Jags to get Mason Graham. But this defensive line class across the board is pretty deep. Yep. Are you pushing is Mason Graham worth pushing your chips in that he's a blue chip talent the way Jalen Carter has been for the Philadelphia Eagles?
Me personally, no. I would not view Mason Graham that way. I really like him. I think he's a really good player, but he's like kind of like the perfect encapsulation about how I view a lot of the top talent in this draft, where I think when you look at Mason Graham and you compare him to Jalen Carter, you compare him to Quinnen Williams, you compare him to other defensive tackles that have gone in this range in the last 7, 8, 9 years. And I would take all of his contemporaries ahead of him, right? I think he's just like a notch below. And I would say the same about Will Campbell, the left tackle from LSU. I would say the same thing about, honestly, like Abdul Carter. I love Abdul Carter. When he was watching his first game against West Virginia as a defensive end this year after moving from linebacker, I was like, man, there's really something to work with here. I do think he's going to go in the top 15, top 10. But taking him at like number 1 or number 3, I'm like, he's not Myles Garrett, right? Like he's not that guy. And so when you compare him to other guys that have gone that high, but that's just how I view this class. And I think that's going to be a way to couch all of these conversations we have all year long, is going to be like, in this class, yeah, I think this guy's going to go that high. In an ideal sense, maybe not. Now, I really like Mason Graham. I think he's as safe as a player as you're going to get. I love the way he plays. People are going to knock him for the arm length, my guess is, in a couple of weeks once that comes out in Indianapolis. But I think at the end of the day, like, he just checks so many boxes. He's got the ability to be, a dominant presence inside. I just think that he's more like high floor as opposed to high ceiling. I'd rather keep the picks, spend those elsewhere. And if if Walter Nolan is there at 10, maybe, or if you want to like trade back and take a Walter Nolan out of Ole Miss, like I think that might be a better use of the investment, especially if you trade back and get him in the middle of the round. Trading could be tough here this year, but to me, I would rather hold on to the picks rather than move up to get Graham.
Okay, that being said, itchy trigger finger, don't trade up. Check. If he falls to 10, are you drafting Mason Graham at 10, or are you trading back because of guys like Walter Nolan and the amount of D tackles that are at your disposal here in this draft?
Yeah, defensive tackle is certainly one of the deeper positions in this group. And so I think that now it's going to come down to like, all right, Ryan Poles, Dennis Allen, Ian Cunningham, like you're having those conversations in the lead up. All right, would we rather, if Mason Graham falls to us, Would we rather have Mason Graham and, insert Donovan Jackson, right? Would we rather have that? Or would we rather have, Kelvin Banks, Josh Simmons, whichever tackle you want to insert there, and then Deion Walker, the defensive tackle from Kentucky, right? Would you rather, like, which combination do we feel better with in terms of our overall value? So you're going to have those conversations leading up. Me personally, I would feel good about taking Mason Graham at 10. You want to stay put. It always takes two to tango in terms of trades. So if you can't, you might not be able to get that trade partner back. My guess is, and this was something I wrote about as well in the piece that just went up today, is that trading it's going to be one of two things. Either there aren't going to be a lot of trades, or if there are trades in the top 20 of this draft, that it's going to be one of those where, like, man, like the trade value chart does not seem like this was a good deal. It could be one of those type of situations here this year where teams are like, all right, like they're not getting a lot of trade action, but we'd rather get something rather than nothing and take a player here that we don't love. Let's pick up a couple picks on day 3. So I do think that the trading could get a little tricky this year. That said, Mason Graham at 10, I think is fair value.
Let's get our guy. Let's just get our guy Hippie Nerd in here, Greg. Hippie Nerd, you're the man. He's asking about the Michigan kid Kenneth Grant would pair well with Dexter. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I like Kenneth Grant, the talent for sure. I do think that this is a little bit of a boom bust type of selection. He is like a true dancing bear from a physical standpoint, like a guys that big, that have those light feet. He's got disruptive ability against both the run and the pass. The production has not always been there. Didn't become a starter until this season, despite all of that physical talent. And so I think when you're looking at Grant, he is a guy that, I think that is probably better run defender than pass rusher. So that I think caps the ceiling as well. So that's why I've got him a little bit lower on my board compared to others. When you're looking at how he's viewed right now in the media. But I think when you look at Grant, physical talent for days, it's about making sure you can tap into that and try and get the most out of it. Now we've heard Ryan Poles say in the past, like, we grade the flashes, or they're going to bet on players with upside, right? And Kenneth Grant, he fits that bill. He fits that mold. And so, I don't know. I think 10 probably a little rich there. If you get into like the early stages of round 2, if you were there at that point, or if it's a trade back situation, I think Kenneth Grant would make some sense.
So we're a little over a week away from going to the NFL Combine. Certainly excited to talk to some of these guys. So who of this wide receiver class, because right now it seems like the Bears are going to run back Rome Odunze and DJ Moore, but unlikely to bring back Keenan Allen. But we'll have to wait and see on that. But obviously Ben Johnson's offense is predicated on speed. So who am I to talk to at the NFL Combine to try to find somebody that diamond in the rough? We're not going to get a Jameson Williams in the first round, but who's somebody that can fit that mold to try to help that role with the Bears offense and Ben Johnson?
Franny asked you this question knowing that he is going to talk to literally everybody there, but who should he talk to?
Well, look, I'll be right there with you, Braggs. I'll be trying to talk to as many of these guys as possible. Look, when you go into the first round, really the only name that stands out to me there from that standpoint is Luther Burden. And I think honestly, like, he's right in that range where the Bears are at 10. Like, he came into the year like he was my wide receiver 1. Now, my guess is there's plenty of scar tissue there for Bears fans. We're like, no, we need trench play. We're not talking about receiver early in this draft. So let's put Luther Burden to the side. I really like what he brings to the table, but let's take him off the board. Isaiah Bond, I think, is an interesting player from a Jameson Williams comparison standpoint. Now, he started his career at Bama, transferred to Texas this year. They were kind of hoping that they would find lightning in a bottle, much like J-Mo did when he was at Ohio State. He transfers down to Alabama, has that huge year, and then it ends up being that first-round pick that the Lions trade up for, right? That didn't happen for Bond this year. A lot of people felt like he might stay put at Texas or even go into the portal. He ends up declaring for this draft. This guy's got juice. He would show up in big games, but he got a little bit knocked out with injuries this past year. Then the inconsistencies were there. So I don't think he's going to be the first-round pick that many thought he could be coming into the year. But you get into day 2, maybe early stages of day 3, and he ends up being that guy. I think that Isaiah Bond, if you're looking for speed, you could definitely do worse there.
If you and Fran, we always appreciate the time. You're the man. Become a diehard. Get all the goods on Fran's draft guide by signing up. $48, $4 a month, and Bears fans, I know you want this. It's a great way to support the show, and also a great way to get yourself a free t-shirt, and also a great way to tell Fran that you love him because he does insane work and he never stops working, and he's our hero. At 72, do you think it's more likely the Bears can get an impact player at running back or wide receiver?
Probably running back this year, Connor. I think when you look at this class, I mentioned that defensive tackle is really deep. I would put running back and tight end, right there next to it. I think when you look at running back this year, I was just watching the other day, Almarian Hampton, the running back from North Carolina. He's my RB2. So he's not going to be there, I think, when we get to the 70s. But I think just an example of what I'm talking about. Like, I just think when you get into day 2 of this draft, there are players on this group that are going to be impact players. Maybe they're not like the foundation RB1, but I'm watching Hampton. I'm like, why isn't this guy talked about like David Montgomery? Modern David Montgomery, not David Montgomery coming out of Iowa State when he was a mid-round guy. Like, I think when you're looking at Hampton, he's a top 50 type pick. You look at Caleb Johnson from Iowa, he's a top 50 type pick. So if you've got Ashton Genty with these two, and you got Travion Henderson from Ohio State, who's also probably in that top 50 conversation, all right, there's another group of guys that are right behind them that are also like, oh man, like I can really see this guy fitting in and finding a really good role. So to me, like when you get into the 70s, I think running back is probably a little bit deeper where I think you'd probably find more of an impact player.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting too, because that was going to be one of my questions earlier. Like when you're looking for a trade back partner, can the Bears even build up a market at 10 to get people to trade up for Ashton Genty, or is because this running back class so deep, that's going to hurt anybody that, feels, the impulse to try to trade up? I know I'm already trying to bait the Cowboys at 12 to move up 2 spots, but maybe because this running back class is so deep that teams are going to hesitate in that.
Yeah, it's the conversation we had earlier about the Mason Graham versus taking one of the tackles. It's the same thing with Ashton Genty, right? It's the same thing, where you're talking Tyler Warren, the tight end from Penn State. Because of the depth at those positions, you can still say, all right, we're getting a great player here, but what if we waited and we got player X, player Y, player Z instead, and we paired that with this position? Those are all conversations that happen once we get like all the hay in the barn from a eval standpoint, from the pre-draft process. All the visits are done, combine's over, pro days are over. Now teams have those conversations. Once you get into like late March, early April, all those teams are going to be having those talks, just like I'm sure we'll be having those conversations here on the show too.
Fran, do you know the Billie Jean Cooper to Jean song? You got that one?
Yeah, I think I've got it.
I mean, you're welcome to go into it. I think it's one of the amazing fun things about the Eagles winning. I don't know do you have a favorite moment from Sunday or even the weekend or after so far?
Yeah, I mean, if you're Cooper DeJean, you have your first NFL interception in the Super Bowl on your birthday and you take it to the house. I mean, that's that and to make it 17-0, that breaks the game open. And now that's when you realize you're like, man, like this might be a laugher. And to me, that's the moment I will remember 5 years from now, 10 years from now, was DeJean's interception for a touchdown.
I'll never forget it either, because my good friend Nick, who stood up at my wedding, is a diehard Eagles fan. I dropped off the very hoodie you're wearing to his house as a gift before the game, and he told me, it's Cooper DeJean's birthday. He's going to score a touchdown, and nice. I didn't put money on it. And as soon as he crossed the end zone, I was furious with myself that I didn't put $20 on it. Just I didn't even want to know what the odds were before the game, because I'm just disappointed that I didn't listen to my good friend. So, but yeah,
go Fran, ahead. I've done 8 zillion parody songs, and none of them have hit like however this guy hit on the Cooper DeJean is not a safety. He's that guy that dude's my hero, even more so than some other of my musical heroes out there. All right, we'll do this again next week, Fran. We can talk to you for an hour. Let's let you get out of here and do your thing. All right.
Appreciate it, guys. We'll talk next week.
We all silly like the mayor.